Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becky and I like to read. Today I thought I would share with you a review of the first 6-star book of the year for me. I give 6 stars to the books that are just a little bit extra. They evoke a strong emotion in me, or they are really unique to the point that I can't stop thinking about them, or they make me have some sort of physiological response while reading them, and that is what this book did for me. Was it a perfect book? Were the characters top-notch perfection? Was the writing superb with no mistakes? Was the historical accuracy there? Was the plot bulletproof with no holes? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And in fact, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I found wrong with this book, but I didn't care. Even when I was able to find things wrong with this book, it still did not diminish the fact that I flew through this book in one sitting. Like, I would be reading it and I would put it down and think, okay, I've read 6 chapters for the day, I'm good. But then I would pick it right back up because I needed to know what was going to happen in the story. And I finished it in just a few hours. So I'm going to share my spoilery thoughts with you. If you haven't read this book and you want to, don't watch this video. If you want to read this book and you don't mind spoilers, then you're welcome to stay. But yes, I am not going to try and censor myself. I am going to share with you all my spoilery thoughts. So, spoiler warning. This is what you get. If you stay beyond this and you're spoiled, that's not my fault. So you've been warned. So the book in question is Anatomy: A Love Story by Dana Schwartz. This is a historical fiction story set in the late 1800s, almost verging on the 1900s, in Edinburgh, Scotland. It is about a girl named Hazel. She's 17 years old. And she has always been fascinated with the human body and how it works. Her father is in the army, so he's very absentee. He's not really part of her life at this point. Her older brother died from the Roman flu, which is essentially like a less deadly version of the bubonic plague. And her mother is currently in mourning for his death, and she's trying to keep her younger brother alive because he will eventually be the heir to all of their estates and things like that should something happen to her husband. So she's pretty much a helicopter mom for her younger brother, and she pretty much ignores Hazel and lets her do whatever she wants, except for the rare occasion that she wants Hazel to go to a ball or a social function to try and find her a husband. Hazel finds this opportunity to study at an anatomy course, but being the late 1800s, women can't do shit in that time. So she has to dress up in her brother's clothes and things like that and pretend to be a boy so that she can take this anatomy course where she is the top student. But when another professor comes in, he's also able to tell that she is a girl, and he pretty much kicks her out of the program. But Hazel is a very determined young woman, and she makes a bargain with this professor that, okay, I might not be able to take your actual anatomy dissection courses, but if I can study and pass my physician's examination, will you allow more women into your studies the next season? And he says, sure, fine. If you can pass your physician's examination without actually having to do the lab work, I'll allow more women to be part of this. So she enlists the help of this young man named Jack, who is essentially a grave robber. He steals bodies from graves and sells them to physicians and university students so that they can dissect the human body and learn from it. And she offers to pay him money so that he can bring her some dead bodies at her estate so that she can work on learning about the human body and things like that, since she isn't able to do it in her study program. And from there, a relationship blooms between them, and they find themselves very drawn to one another. So that is essentially the synopsis. So let's talk about the things that I found wrong with this book that other people might find wrong with it as well, that might not give it as high rating as I gave it. First of all, this book is set in Edinburgh, Scotland. And granted, I read the physical book, I didn't listen to the audiobook, so maybe the audiobook narrators sound like they're from Edinburgh or sound like they're from the UK in general, but just reading it, it did not come across that way. It read very much like Americans talking. Another thing I found mildly wrong with it is this title. It's called Anatomy: A Love Story. However, there's not really a prominent love story in this book. Yes, there is a love story between Hazel and Jack, but their relationship really doesn't kick in until the second half of the book. They really don't even start interacting with each other until then. And when they do, it's not the major focus of the story. The last thing I found wrong with this book is that it seemed a little too easy. Some of the procedures that went on during the dissections and things, they just seemed a little too easy. Like, I'm sure it's a lot harder to cut somebody from their breastbone to their groin to dissect them other than a simple slice. I'm sure that takes a lot more effort. Also, there is a scene at the end of this book in which the professor is pretty much kidnapping poor people, putting them under with drugs, and then taking their body parts and transplanting them into rich people. So in one of these scenes, there is a rich older man who has a glass eye, and he is taking the poor boy's healthy eye and transplanting it into the old man's eye socket, pretty much. And I don't know, I've only really watched medical dramas on TV. I don't know a whole lot about the systems, but I just don't think you can pop out somebody's eye and then plop it into a socket and be like, okay, your vision will slowly start to improve. I'm pretty sure there's like veins and arteries that you have to connect to the brain because it all has to go through the brain. You can't just plop out an eyeball and put it in a socket. So things like that were a little bit simplified. And you have to remember that this is a YA book. It's fiction. It ain't gonna be realistic, and I don't expect it to be realistic. So the things that I noticed that were wrong with this book, I just didn't care. I didn't care in the slightest. I pushed past it, and I just enjoyed this book so damn much that even though I found things wrong with it, I still gave it 6 stars. Let me tell you what I loved about this book. First of all, it is a historical fiction. I love historical fiction books. I especially love YA historic fiction because I always feel like the characters are older than they seem. And that's something I've discovered with almost every young adult historical fiction I've read. I also really loved that this book was set in Edinburgh, even though I didn't get a sense that the characters were actually Scottish. I am actually planning on visiting Edinburgh in July. It has been a dream vacation for me for years. So when I read that this book was set in Edinburgh, I'm like, oh my god. The signs are all there. The universe is speaking to me. I am meant to go to Edinburgh. I absolutely loved that Hazel is a very smart and ambitious female character. She really wants to be a physician, and even when people are telling her, you're a girl, you can't be a physician, she does have some insecurities and struggles with that, which is natural. You know, she doubts herself, but she turns around and she picks herself up and she's like, screw you. I want to do this. I am good at this. I am going to make this happen whether or not you want me to. And even when she starts developing feelings for Jack and their relationship starts to bloom, that doesn't take away from her motivation to want to become a physician. And she isn't over here like pining and, oh, I wonder what he's thinking, and oh, I should just get rid of my dreams and become his little wife or something. No, she is still very much, I'm going to take my physician's examination. I am going to pass this. I am going to be a doctor. And I really liked that Jack really encouraged her to do so. I did feel like their relationship was a tad insta-lovey. I'm not too sure of the timeline of how long they were together. So let's say on the low end, they were together for a month. High end, they were together for like 4 months. But again, I had to remember this is set in the late 1800s, and people back then were, you know, marrying their 12-year-olds off to 60-year-old men, and girls were having babies at the age of 14. I think one of the other reasons that Hazel did fall in love with Jack so easily, I mean, by the end of this book, she was pretty much proclaiming, I will love no one else but you, Jack. You are the love of my life. And I'm thinking, oh, honey, you're 17. But then I thought, you know what? You're in the 1800s. You're a woman. You pretty much need a man for anything because you can't do shit as a woman in that time period. And Jack is over here encouraging you to follow your dreams. I mean, what girl wouldn't fall in love with that, right? And while Hazel does give off a little bit of I'm not like other girl energy, which is another trope that really just grinds my gears and I don't really care for, in this sense, I feel like her not being like other girls was actually true, because within this story in Edinburgh, there weren't any other women who were interested in anatomy and physiology and becoming a doctor. This book is relatively morbid and grotesque. There is a scene in which Hazel and Jack are trying to take a body from a grave, and they think they hear somebody coming, and they end up hiding in the grave, and they end up kissing. They are literally kissing in a grave. Tell me that's not morbid AF. But I was like, I rolled with it. I was like, you know what, this is kind of interesting. This is kind of unique. I'm digging it. The ending of this book literally, like, I think I was experiencing anxiety because my heart was just pounding like crazy, and I was like, oh my god, and my hands were shaking because I couldn't turn the pages quick enough. So I think this book like did a number on me. It also disrupted my sleep pattern. I am somebody who has a very strict sleeping pattern. I'm like getting ready for bed at 9 o'clock, in bed at 9:30. I'm usually asleep by 10:30 most nights. But this book, I finished it and I was like, okay, I finished this book. I can go to bed. I'm sure it's like 9 o'clock. It was 11:45 at night. I was like, oh my god, this book has messed me up. If you're somebody who likes your endings to be nicely wrapped up and tied with a bow, if you're somebody who likes justice to be served in your books, and you like the bad guys to get their due, you might not like this book, because the end of this book does none of that. It is a very open-ended book left up to the reader's imagination as to where the characters will be. And the bad guy in the book really just, nothing happens to him. He's still the bad guy at the end of the book. But again, reading this, I was like, you know what? That's pretty much how it would have been in this time period. I mean, you have Hazel, who's a 17-year-old young woman, up against all of these men who are educated and wealthier than her. They're not going to believe her side of the story. And they're not going to care that the bad guy is kidnapping poor people off the streets and operating on them without their consent because they're poor people. Nobody's going to care in this time period. So the bad guy going free kind of made sense. So those are basically my thoughts on Anatomy, a Love Story by Dana Schwartz. The things I loved about it, the things that I found wrong about it, but completely dismissed because I loved it so much. And if I were to read this book like 5 years in the future, I might not rate it as highly as I do right now. But in this moment, this book just wowed me. It really just sucked me into the story. It kept me there and wouldn't let me go. But if you're somebody who has read this book and you didn't like it as much as I did, let me know down in the comments why. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until my next video, read something extraordinary for me.